And Swern has built what looks like an impressive case for becoming Brooklyn's next district attorney. She's worked for 4 DAs, from Eugene Gold to Ken Thompson, supervised more than 1,100 attorneys and staff, and says she has 1,000 ideas for the office.
Swern is one of 7 candidates running in September's primary, and she's here to talk about a few of those 1,000 ideas. Thanks for joining us on BK Live.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So let's get right into it. So we know that this is a crowded race. Just enlighten us. How many people usually run for a position like this?
Usually, I don't know. In this race, 7.
Right.
7 happens to be the magic number. Why do you think this job has just become such a lightning rod over the past few years? Last time it was the only sort of competitive borough-wide race in Brooklyn, and it looks like it's shaping up that way again this year.
Well, this year it's an open seat, so I think an open seat brings a certain amount of attention and certain people that might not previously enter a race. And the district attorney's role is a critical role to all the things, the big things that we read about every day, the big things we think about every day in terms of criminal justice policy. When you look at all the research, the discretion decision-making of a district attorney is key to those big issues. For example, if people talk about mass incarceration, the biggest actor in that is actually the district attorney and her decision-making, and at the critical junctures, what those decisions are. And especially when you talk about the mass part of mass incarceration. The mass part of a mass incarceration is what happens in every courtroom, in every case, involving every victim or survivor and every defendant. So these are the big issues that we're talking about, but when you distill them, you actually look at the role of the district attorney and how critical that is to those issues.
So you've served under 4 different district attorneys, and now you're going for the top job yourself. So I wondered what your sort of view of the job is and what you would bring to it.
Well, I'm really excited about actually having the job because I want the buck to stop with me. Working for somebody is very different than being the person who can make the decisions, and especially in a large organization. And that's what leadership looks like. And you can talk about reform and you can write about reform, but making reform happen is really a leadership quality, which is, what does 1,100 people, what do they do? What do they think? How do they act? How are they trained? How are they supervised? How are positive things reinforced? How are negative things addressed? Are they addressed in a way that's constructive, that allows for growth and opportunity and justice, or are they addressed in a way that limits the pedagogical tool of it, that limits the ability for others to learn from those mistakes? And when those mistakes are unethical or critical to a person's life, then they need to be addressed in a specific way.
So just for a second, because just in recent history, we went from Charles Hines, who was an incumbent for a long time, and then Ken Thompson, who you worked with just briefly. You weren't at the office for his entire tenure, but it seems to be, as of late, you vilify the Hines term and glorify the Thompson. And I wondered what you learned working in both offices and how you would go forward from both of those things.
Well, when you say you vilified.
Not you in particular, but that's been the trend. They say, oh, well, when Hines was, but now it's almost like Thompson's been sainted since his untimely passing. But what room for improvement do you see in that office?
Well, I think the 4 district attorneys that I worked for, each of them did excellent things, and each of them did things that can be built upon or improved or changed. That's why I say the buck will stop with me.
Gotcha.
And so, for example, the things that I was responsible for under the Charles Hines administration, I'm very proud of. The Red Hook Community Justice Center, the Mental Health Court, Brooklyn's Treatment Court, the Alcohol Court, the Domestic Violence Program, the Adolescent Justice Program.
Problem-solving justice.
And that's what I teach at Brooklyn Law School, actually. I created a course with the Department of Justice and the Center for Court Innovation about problem-solving justice because of my expertise. Because when you sit at the table with stakeholders, you learn what the problem is. When we address problems in criminal justice or in life, if you don't specifically name the problem, you'll never solve the problem. And so it's really important for all the stakeholders to be at the table in order to name it and solve it. And I give a perfect example of that with the mental health court. It was a very difficult thing to do, especially with felony cases. But having at the table consumers of mental health services, NAMI, the National Alliance of the Mentally Ill, obviously the defense bar, the prosecutors, the police, the treatment providers, the court system, all of those people came together and said what their issue was relative to forensic criminal justice and mental health and criminal justice. That's why we have an excellent court, and those programs need to be built upon in the future, and that's really what the future of Brooklyn looks like.
Nice. Well, talking about Brooklyn, we know how diverse Brooklyn is, and this DA's race is truly reflective of that. I think in the race we have a Latino man and an openly gay candidate. So being a woman, a white woman, how does this impact your thoughts and your race at all?
Okay, well, I'm the only mother in the race, and I think that that's a really important thing because being a mother and being a law school professor, being a prosecutor, being a public defender tells you that I know how to multitask a job. And I think that's really important when you have a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week job. The second thing about it is discretionary decision-making doesn't only happen in a vacuum. It doesn't only happen as the role of a DA. And I like to say that, for example, a mother thinks, or a parent thinks about her child's safety first. As they get older, when they leave the home, are they going to be safe going to school? Once they're in the school, are they going to be bullied there, or is it going to be a safe environment in which they can safely learn? But also, mothers and parents think about, if my child made a mistake, would they be forever branded by that mistake? Would they be prevented from going to further education? Would they be prevented from getting a job? And how would that mistake impact the rest of their life? And that's another thing that I think criminal justice professionals, and especially district attorneys, have to be mindful of when they're balancing safety and justice. And there's always a balance, and those things always have to be in the front of a prosecutor's mind to do great work.
So is that concern what led you down a very unusual path of going from the DA's office to the Brooklyn Defenders, flipping what side of the courtroom you're on? What kind of perspective does that give you in returning to an office that's chief initiative is prosecuting?
I think that it is such a singular and unbelievably wonderful experience that I have, because when we talk about mass incarceration, the mass part of mass incarceration are all the cases, not just the cases that the media focuses on. I'm so happy that the media is focused on things about criminal justice reform, because that brings dollars to criminal justice reform, it brings attention, it brings energetic, great people to want to change the system, and all of that's wonderful. But we really need to remember that criminal justice reform doesn't happen because we look at 3 cases and we say it's an anecdote. Every case, every courtroom has to have that happening. Otherwise, you're not leading an office. The people are not doing the people's work. The prosecutor is the people's prosecutor. When we stand up in court, every day we say it's the people of the state of New York. That's who we represent. Well, the people need to have confidence in that system. The people need to say, you are our employee. We hold you accountable. You need to be transparent in your decision making. And that's why I want to be the district attorney, so I can be that person to the people who elect me.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the program that, one of your greatest accomplishments, the program that you created to divert drug addicts and prison-bound and non-violent repeat offenders into residential substance abuse?
Okay, well, there are several programs, but one of them that I think you're talking about is the Drug Treatment Alternative to Prison program. And that was really groundbreaking in 1990. We talk about drug treatment now in 2017, but in 1990, there was mandatory incarceration. That was the Rockefeller, that was the heyday of the Rockefeller drug laws. And so what we did is, instead of 2 years of mandatory incarceration, people went to up to 2 years of residential drug treatment. And it's had a profound impact on the state, because when they reformed the Rockefeller drug laws, they came to us to say what should be the model. And that's great for Brooklyn, that Brooklyn is known as that. And that's one of the reasons I want to be the Brooklyn DA, because Brooklyn can be a laboratory for change. We're already known as a diverse, energetic, creative borough. Well, creativity in criminal justice, it has its roots here in Brooklyn with all of these programs, but there's so much more that needs to be done, and that's why I'm running. There's so much in adolescent justice. You know, we just raised the age here. But how did we do it? We did it with lots of opportunity for district attorneys to actually exercise the discretion. What stays in family court? What goes in criminal court? And how do those courts both serve the concept but behind Raise the Age, which is that the brain doesn't fully develop till it's 25 years old.
Right.
And that impetuous decision-making is a hallmark of young people. But the flip side of that is there's a lot of brain plasticity, which means they're amenable to change in the right environment under the right circumstances. And knowing the details of that and making that work and creating programming and policies around that, because of my experience, is one of the great pleasures that I will have when I'm the next DA.
So that begs the question, what's the DTAP of 2017 and beyond? Can you sort of outline 3 areas that you, or even 3 concrete plans that you'd like to institute as Brooklyn's next DA?
Okay, well, in terms of programming, adolescent justice, as I mentioned, and this is where leadership goes, is that who's at the table to actually create that adolescent court? Is it the administrative judge? Is it the district attorney herself bringing her top-level staff to say, this is what my vision is. This is where I'm going to put my resources. Because you could put an inexperienced staff member there, or you could put a very experienced staff member there. And I think that transmits to the staff and to the community and to the people who elected her and to all the stakeholders that that's very significant. Because young people are vulnerable to certain things that makes them different from older people, that I think that I would be at the table to create that. I would make sure my top staff were there. I would make sure resources were there and the best possible programming. The other thing that I would do is, even though I'm not in charge of the prosecutors at family court, I have a great relationship with them. They're actually the corporation counsel. Keeping those great relationships over the past almost 40 years that I've developed is why I'll know, as the person elected to make sure Brooklyn's safe, but also that Brooklyn is fair, that our family court is acting consistently with our criminal court, so that the public doesn't see different policies just because the child or the adolescent ends up in a different place. So that's one of the things. The other thing is, I think there's much more that can be done in the sex trafficking part. That, you know, we call it a sex trafficking part, but it's really prostitutes getting services. And if we really want to get at trafficking, both labor trafficking and sex trafficking, which are interwoven, there's much more that can be done. And the other thing is, we talk about, and this is not so much about programming, but about the structure of the office, disproportionate contact of minorities in the criminal justice system. Right. That is a real thing that needs to be addressed. There's been a lot of research being done, and what I propose is to have a statistician in the office that actually keeps me and my people accountable for what's going on in terms of disproportionate impact on communities of color in our discretionary decision making. There's plenty of junctures where that happens. It may happen inadvertently, but it's the responsibility of the DA to make sure that doesn't happen.
We have 2 minutes left, and I kind of have a double-headed question, if I can. So one is, there is someone who's looking at their television right now saying, bust the perps. We don't need these social programs. It's not your job or your purview to divert people, put the bad guys away. And the second part of that is, I wonder about the feeling and the makeup. We know that we've heard about ICE being in courtrooms recently and the Trump administration interacting on the court level. So I wonder, in the last 2 minutes, about those things, what you feel about just the feeling of the court and what the job is in law and order and keeping the feeling of Brooklyn.
Can I just say something? The feeling of Brooklyn is everybody wants to be safe.
Yeah.
Who can hurt us? Actually spending the last 40 years discerning who can hurt us and who can't has been one of the hallmarks of my experience. And there are people who can hurt us. I was just in the green room with one of your next guests about Red Hook, and we were talking about a case that I tried and convicted. There was a man, gunpoint robbery with a mask and a semi-automatic weapon, who did a series of daytime barroom robberies where people were lying on the floor with their heads down, the bartenders lying on the floor while the money was stolen. And it was the community and the police who caught the tattooed bandit. When he heard that I was both instrumental in the Red Hook Community Justice Center setting it up, but I also tried the tattoo bandit, that tells the whole story, that I know how to do that. I tell an example because this week we've been talking a lot about police killing unarmed black men. In 1989, a man was killed on Eastern Parkway. That police officer I tried, he was convicted, and he did go to state prison. So do I know how to try people and to, ensure that justice is being done in that way? Of course I do. Every prosecutor knows how to do it. It's the balance. It's knowing who it can hurt us and who can't. That's really the art and the science. It's not whether you can do that. And lastly, with immigrants, of course I'd be a hedge against the Trump policies. Of course I would make sure that my office perpetuated the notion of a sanctuary, which is victims could come there, never be asked about their immigration status, that I'd go out to the victims to make sure that they feel safe in their communities, coming forward to a government agency to report people who hurt them. Because if they could hurt that victim, they could hurt somebody else. And finally, to get disproportionately punished because of your immigration status, you jump over the turnstile, you can get sent back to a country you have no contact with, as opposed to somebody else who has a fine or community service, is not justice. So, of course, I would know how to address that. And believe me, you could invite me back 20,000 times, and those 1,000 ideas we could talk about every single day. And I would be happy to do so.
We'll be looking for you in forums. And Swern is a candidate for Brooklyn District Attorney. Show up at the polls in September. Choose your choice.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It was so nice to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.